She never imagined a regular day could turn into a real story. My name is Sarah, I'm 25. After the wedding, I moved in with my husband, and his stepfather was already living with us in the house. First, it seemed convenient. He helped out around the house, always remained calm, and didn't pry into other people's business. But the more I got to know him, the more I felt that something was hiding beneath his outward composure, something that made every evening together feel tense. In the mornings, he would come into the kitchen earlier than anyone else, pour himself a coffee, and read the newspaper. I would enter quietly, trying not to disturb him, but his gaze would always linger on me longer than necessary. There were no words, no physical touches, but the very silence between us began to feel heavy. In the evenings, when my husband worked late, we would be left alone. He might walk past a little too close, or lean in to hand me a cup of tea, and our fingers would accidentally brush. I pretended not to notice, but inside my heart would start to beat faster. With each passing day, I became more and more aware that something more was hidden beneath the ordinary routine. But what? I was afraid to admit it, even to myself. One evening, rain tapped on the roof. My husband was again working late, and we were alone once more. I sat in the living room with a book, trying to focus on the words, but every rustle and every step made me tremble inside. He came in quietly, a cup of tea in his hands, and placed it on the table next to me. "You're too tense," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something special in it. I looked up and met his gaze. It was long, too intense, as if he were searching for an answer in me that I didn't dare to give. I tried to look away but couldn't. The room was silent, with only the rain outside filling the pauses, and that silence made our gazes even more eloquent. He sat down next to me, a little closer than simple politeness would allow. His presence filled the entire space, and I knew that if he took one more step, I wouldn't be able to pretend that nothing was happening. I feigned interest in my book again, but my fingers were trembling, and the letters blurred before my eyes. He sat so close that I could feel the warmth of his shoulder, and the faint scent of tobacco mixed with the freshness of the rain he'd brought in from outside. "You know," he said softly, and then fell silent as if scared of his own words. I hugged the book to my chest, unable to find a response, but he wasn't waiting for one anymore. His hand rested on the armrest of the sofa, just inches from mine. The gesture was simple, but the air between us thickened, as if there wasn't enough time to breathe. I glanced at him and caught an expression that couldn't be mistaken for mere concern. There was too much desire, prohibition, and expectation in it. In that second, I realized we were both on the verge, and if we took even one wrong step, our lives would never be the same. I hugged the book even tighter, as if it could be a shield, but the tension only grew. He leaned slightly forward, and the lamp behind his shoulder illuminated his face, which was calm. But his eyes gave away everything he was trying to hide. "You don't have to be silent," he said quietly, almost in a whisper. And those words sounded as if we had been having a conversation without words for a long time. I felt my heart beating in my throat. I wanted to get up and leave, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. In that silence, I could even hear my own breathing. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from my face. The movement was soft, as if accidental, but I knew there were no accidents. At that moment, I realized the game was over. We had both gone too far to return to our usual calm. I froze, feeling his fingers near my temple, and that simple gesture sent a shiver down my spine. He pulled his hand away as slowly as he had approached, but the distance between us no longer felt safe. I turned my head and met his gaze, and in that moment the entire room disappeared. The rain, the ticking of the clock, the book in my hands. Everything became a backdrop for the tension that overwhelmed us both. He sat next to me, but it felt as though he was pulling me closer with every second, even though he made no movement. His gaze was too direct, too revealing, and I couldn't look away. I knew that one more step and we would cross the line beyond which ordinary life would end. He leaned back slightly, but his gaze remained just as intent, as if he were testing how long I could withstand this silent game. I could feel my heart pounding so loudly it could be heard in the silence, and my fingers on the book turned white from the strain. He smiled softly, but there was no mockery in it, more of an understanding that I felt the same way he did. His hand again rested on the armrest of the sofa, this time closer, and our fingers almost touched. I didn't move my hand away, and that pause lasted an eternity, filled with unspoken words and forbidden attraction. I took a deep breath, hoping it would restore my composure, but I only became more aware that we could no longer pretend. Too much had accumulated in those glances, in the silence, in every accidental touch. Another moment and the boundary would finally collapse. He leaned slightly toward me, and in that instant time seemed to stand still. I felt the warmth of his shoulder nearby and heard him exhale so close that his breath touched my skin. My hand trembled and my fingers barely touched his palm. It wasn't planned, but it was this innocent gesture that broke the last bit of resistance. He didn't pull away. On the contrary, his fingers closed tighter, as if he had been waiting for this moment for too long. I looked up and our gazes met again. There was no longer a shadow of a doubt in them, only a tense silence in which we both understood that there was no turning back. The world outside continued to live its own life. The rain beat on the roof, the wind rattled the shutters. But here in this room, everything was being decided between the two of us. I felt his fingers firmly holding my hand, and that simple touch turned my world upside down. We sat so close that any movement could be the step over the line. His gaze didn't let go. It was heavy, deep, as if he were looking for an answer I was afraid to say out loud. He leaned a little closer, and the distance between us almost completely disappeared. I could hear his breathing, feel the warmth of his skin, and my heart was beating so fast it seemed the whole house could hear it. I tried to say something, but the words got stuck in my throat. Silence became the only language, and it said everything for us. I understood that in another moment, we would stop being just a stepfather and a daughter-in-law under the same roof. This night had already changed everything. He squeezed my hand a little harder, and this simple movement was louder than any confession. I sat motionless, but inside, everything was on fire, as if a flame was growing stronger with every second. His face was so close that I could make out every feature, every detail, and I couldn't look away. "You know," he said softly, almost in a whisper, and his voice sounded as if he were speaking not with his ears, but straight from his heart. I didn't answer because the answer was already written in everything. In my breathing, in the fact that I didn't move my hand away, in the fact that I didn't pull back. We sat as if the whole world had disappeared, and only the two of us were left, connected by something greater than could be explained. Another moment, and what had been hidden in the silence would have to break free. He slowly ran his fingers over my palm, and that simple movement sent shivers down my spine. I froze but didn't pull away, as if I had unwittingly acknowledged what I had been avoiding for so long. His gaze didn't let go, pulling me closer, and in that silence between us, there was nothing accidental left. He leaned closer, and now I could hear his every breath, feel the warmth of his presence. My heart was beating at a frantic pace, my breathing became uneven, and I knew that if this moment lasted for even one more second, we wouldn't be able to go back to how things were. I squeezed his fingers in return, almost timidly, but enough to show that I felt the same. He understood without words. Something flared up in his eyes that finally erased all boundaries. This night became the line where the familiar routine ended, and a story began that was now impossible to stop. He leaned in even closer, so that our knees almost touched, and I could feel his warmth through the thin fabric. The room was still silent, only the rain outside kept its rhythm, emphasizing the tension between us. His hand slid higher on my palm, stopping at my wrist, and the movement felt so natural, as if he had always had the right to do that. My breathing caught. I closed my eyes for just a second, but that was enough. The world around us disappeared. When I opened my eyes, he was already very close. His gaze had softened, but that only made it burn more intensely. I caught myself thinking that I no longer wanted to back away, no longer wanted to hide behind familiar words and roles. We both understood that in this moment, a choice had been made, and now our lives would never go back to the way they were. I felt his fingers rise cautiously but confidently, sliding toward my shoulder. That touch took my breath away, as if my heart had stopped for a moment, and then rushed into a frantic rhythm. He was looking straight into my eyes, and I couldn't look away. In those few seconds, there was more meaning than in all our conversations over the past months. It was an acknowledgement without words, a desire that we had both hidden for too long. My palm moved on its own to his chest. I felt the hot beating of his heart beneath the fabric of his shirt. He didn't move, just inhaled a little deeper, as if he had been waiting for this moment just as much as I had. There was no space left between us, no prohibitions, only the feeling that we had crossed an invisible line and were now moving forward together, to a place where everything would change. His hand lingered on my shoulder, and then slowly slid down my arm, and that simple gesture seemed much more intimate than any words. I could hear the blood pounding in my temples. Every second stretched into an eternity. He leaned a little closer, and now only a breath separated our faces. I could feel his warmth, the smell of tobacco and rain, and hear the uneven rhythm of his breathing. Inside me, fear and desire were fighting, but desire was winning with every new second. I didn't take a single step back. My palm pressed harder against his chest, and he understood that movement without words. Something ignited in his eyes that made it hard for me to breathe. The world outside was humming with rain, but here in this room we had already stopped being just people connected by chance. We had become part of a story we had begun to write ourselves that night. He froze for a second, as if giving me one last chance to pull away, but I didn't take a single step back. His palm rested on my waist, confidently but cautiously. And in that touch was everything: prohibition and strength, and the desire that we had both hidden for too long. I felt my breath tremble, my heart beating so loudly that it seemed to fill the entire room. His gaze pierced me through and through, and I understood he was waiting for my answer, waiting. Would I allow this moment to become a reality? I pressed my fingers harder against his chest, and he understood without words. Our faces were so close that the boundaries disappeared, and the whole world beyond this room no longer mattered. This night became the point where we crossed an invisible line and could no longer turn back. He pulled me closer, and I felt his warmth envelop me, leaving me unable to think of anything but this moment. His hand held me firmly but cautiously, as if he was afraid of scaring me away, even though there was no longer any doubt between us. I closed my eyes for just an instant, and that was enough for my heart to break free from control. Our breaths mingled, and the room filled with a thick silence in which only our hearts could be heard. I knew that in another moment, what we had avoided for so long would happen, but to which all the accidental touches, glances, and silences had been leading all along. I didn't pull away, and with that choice, I decided more than I could have said with words. His fingers slowly slid down my back, and that movement took my breath away. I stood so close that I could feel every second of tension turning into something bigger, something inevitable. He looked straight into my eyes, and that gaze seemed to drain all the resistance from me. I knew that one more step, and there would be no turning back. But I didn't pull away. On the contrary, I leaned closer myself, letting him understand without words that I shared every feeling, every desire that we had hidden for so long. The room filled with silence, and even the rain outside now seemed distant. We were no longer just a stepfather and stepdaughter-in-law in the same house. We had become people bound by a night, a desire, and a prohibition. And that line that we had finally crossed changed everything. He kept his hand on my waist as if afraid to let go. And there was more acknowledgement in that gesture than in any words. His breathing became heavier, and his gaze didn't let go, making my heart beat faster and faster. I felt the tension turn into heat, as every second brought us closer to a point where it was impossible to stop. Inside, everything was trembling with fear, with desire, with the realization that my familiar life was now behind me. He leaned in even closer, so that I could hear his every breath, feel the warmth of his skin, and I no longer wanted to back away. I allowed myself to take a step forward, and with that decision I myself destroyed the last barrier. Night fell on us, a silent witness to our crossing a line that could not be undone. He carefully ran his fingers along my cheek, and I didn't pull away. On the contrary, I leaned closer, as if I were looking for that touch myself. Inside, everything was mixed together. Fear, prohibition, desire, and it was no longer possible to tell which was stronger. His hand rested more firmly on my waist, pulling me closer. I heard his breathing become clearer, and my own breathing fell into the same rhythm. We seemed to dissolve into one another, and the whole house, the whole world disappeared beyond the confines of this room. The moment lasted an eternity, and I knew that everything was now decided. We had taken a step that changed both of us, and there was no point in pretending we could go back to the way things were. This night became the answer to all the silent glances and unspoken words. His lips were so close that his breath burned my skin, and I could no longer resist that pull. Everything inside me was on fire. Every cell in my body was waiting for the continuation that we both feared and wanted at the same time. He held me a little tighter, and I felt the last bit of distance disappear. My heart was beating so loudly it seemed ready to burst out. I closed my eyes, and in that instant, everything around me ceased to exist. No rain, no house, no familiar routine. Only the two of us, connected by a secret that could no longer be hidden. This was no longer an accident or a game. It was a choice we had made together. And from then on, we belonged to this night, its silence and its forbidden heat. His hands held me firmly, and in that embrace was everything, and strength and fear, and the desire we had hidden for so long. I felt hundreds of emotions merge in my chest, and I understood that this night we had crossed an invisible line. It became our special secret that no one would ever know. But it was this night that changed both of us forever, and it was no longer possible to go back to our old lives.